there's a bunch of calorie like diehards who are like, oh no, cookies and salmon are the same if they're the same calories. I'm like, you guys are idiots, because the minute you put those foods in your mouth, the hormonal response is completely and utterly different. That is, if you eat cookies, your insulin spikes way up. If you eat salmon or an egg or an avocado, same calories, totally different hormonal response.
I want to know, why are there so many sophisticated people out there who have PhDs, and I'm not going to name names, but they're very smart people who say that if you want to lose weight, you just got to cut your calories and exercise more. It's all an energy expenditure hypothesis to lose weight. Why are they still saying this to this day?
I think it's because it's very difficult if you've built sort of a career based on calories. And you got to realize that there's a lot of people that are very interested in keeping the focus on calories, because and they got busted a few years ago. So Coca-Cola, for example, had been funding the University of Colorado to promote this global energy balance consortium or something like that. And it was profiled in the New York Times, because what Coca-Cola wanted to do, of course, was to keep people focused on calories, so that they could say, well, if you eat 100 calories of broccoli, it's as fattening as 100 calories of Coca-Cola, which of course is completely not true. Like, who gets fat eating broccoli? Like, just about nobody. So, but they wanted to make that sort of equivalent, so that you don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with that sugary soda that you're about to drink, and it's very profitable for them. So they have a vested interest in keeping the focus on calories, because of course they are peddling sugary drinks, which is sort of the opposite of what I and most other people who are reasonably intelligent about nutrition say. There's a bunch of calorie like diehards who are like, oh no, cookies and salmon are the same if they're the same calories. I'm like, you guys are idiots, because the minute you put those foods in your mouth, the hormonal response is completely and utterly different. That is, if you eat cookies, your insulin spikes way up. If you eat salmon or an egg or an avocado, same calories, totally different hormonal response. Insulin goes, goes nowhere, but peptide YY, which is a satiety hormone, or cholecystokinin, which is a satiety hormone, they go up. So it's a totally different response of your body to different foods. And that's obvious. We can measure that. There's no reason you can't measure that. But for some reason, people still say, oh, no, it's about calories. So the thing is that if you're brought up with this idea that it's calories, if you've written a bunch of papers that it's about calories, it's all about calories, ketogenic diets work because they restrict calories. I'm like, whatever you say, right? It's like, you can argue that the point is that it's very convenient for certain food companies and beverage companies to keep that focus, because then you can do two things. You can equate all foods, so that all of a sudden your sugary soda is no worse than anything else. And you can equate diet and exercise, because diet and exercise are totally different things. Diet is what you eat. It affects the liver mostly. Exercise is mostly about skeletal muscle. They're totally different. There's nothing the same about them. But through the magic of calories, you can say, wow, if you walk 100 minutes, you'll burn off X amount of calories, which means you could eat, this many cookies. There's nothing the same about them, because again, they're completely different physiologic pathways, and calories is not a physiologic term. There's no calorie receptors in our body. Our body doesn't respond to calories. Our body responds to proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. That's what it does. It doesn't care about calories in any way. So you can't equate them, because again, you can't exercise your liver, for example. So you eat a lot of cookies, for example, your liver is going to store fat. Your insulin's going to go way up. You're going to store a lot of glycogen. If you store too much, then you wind up making fat with de novo lipogenesis. Well, how does exercise impact that? Not at all. So you're going to be healthier in that you're going to be stronger, but you're going to still have a fatty liver and develop type 2 diabetes. So exercise and diet are completely separate things, but calories makes them the same. And that's why Coca-Cola was so interested to make all of a sudden this obesity crisis is not a crisis of, hey, you're drinking too much Coca-Cola. it's a crisis of, hey, you should have got off your butt and exercise, which is like, okay, now you've just changed the whole story of what the problem was. And if you don't know the problem, you can't fix it, because if you think that you can eat cookies and drink Coke and then exercise and you'll be healthy, you're wrong. But Coca-Cola wants you to be right. So they spent so much money. Like, there's physicians, for example, at the University of Toronto, where I am, and they've written in the newspaper and they've written papers about how fructose and sugar is almost a health food. I'm like, okay, you've got to be kidding me. Like, how can you think it's almost a health food? It's ridiculous. But yet he goes and writes papers. Then you look at his conflicts of interest, and he's paid by Coca-Cola, and he's been sent all over the world by Coca-Cola and all this sort of stuff. And he gets into the newspaper because Coca-Cola, buys a lot of influence. So it's sort of like, that's why there's so much interest in keeping this whole calorie story. But it's sort of there's a lot of conflicts there.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a huge distraction to what really matters. And you just broke down what really matters. It's the hormonal response, the metabolic response from those calories. You could have gone down that path because you had a decision. You built your career mostly in the conventional world, what you just spoke about. And then you came across research. You figured out, you found out that it was not working for you. And then you had a decision to make. You had a decision to explore the ketogenic diet, a low carb diet, and intermittent fasting, or stick to your guns and do what you built your career doing. So what was it for you? Because you made that switch, and that must have been so difficult. And I'm sure some of your peers, you got some backlash. So I'd love for you to share how difficult that transition was for you, and what kind of backlash did you receive at that point of your career?
Yeah, so there was a huge backlash, especially to sort of like low carb diets were around, so people knew about them, but nobody wanted to hear about ketogenic diets, which were sort of much higher in fat than the usual, and fasting, of course, nobody wanted to hear about. And the thing is that it's so much easier just to sort of say, oh, well, I guess there are experts, and this is what most people say. It's like, well, there are experts in nutrition, and they say it's all about calories, and also my local university affiliated endocrinologist or whatever says it's all about calories, so they must be right. But, to me, again, it goes back to, it didn't really satisfy me in terms of searching for what was really true, because it made no sense at all. And so, if you're not that interested in it, then you'd probably just leave it. You'd say, whatever, there's a minor mystery here, but I'm just going to go off because I'm busy and my kids have hockey and whatever, right? But that's not sort of the way I am. I sort of get really interested, like obsessed with these questions. And when things don't sort of match up, that interests me sort of intensely from a sort of scientific standpoint. I mean, that's why that's why I was so interested in like research, for example, because there are these sort of puzzles that need to be figured out. And that's really what I was trying to get. And it's like, that's why I really made that switch. So because I was so interested in this question, this sort of scientific puzzle, because it impacted so many people. But on the other hand, I just get sort of that way, in that I don't like it when things don't make sense to me. And when I see it's glaring omission, I want to get to the bottom of it. So that's sort of why. And then, so as I started to talk about it, it's the same thing. It's really difficult at first, because really I was out there mostly on my own. And of course, there were some other people talking about it, but not specifically about fasting. But there was a few people that were very interested in that, so like Andreas of Diet Doctor and Professor Tim Noakes and sort of thing. There was a number of people. Gary Taubes obviously had talked about this, although not exactly in the same manner, but he talked about this sort of conundrum as well for many years. So but as you talk about it, there's a lot of people who don't want to hear it because they're not that interested. To them, it's just sort of this minor problem, and let's just go with what everybody else says. And I'm this voice that's saying no. So of course there's a lot of backlash, but then sort of funny thing happened, because patients were getting better when they were doing the fasting. And at the end of the day, you can't ignore that, because this is what we do. This is my job, is to make people better. And so the thing is that other doctors had noticed, so within my area, like a lot of family physicians and so on, they would see, oh, hey, there's this patient that I had with 20 years of type 2 diabetes that just went away. They lost weight, they got off all their medications, and they're super happy. And to other physicians, that's sort of proof, like in the flesh, and you can't ignore that. So that's where it became very, very hard to deny that this is a reasonable alternative for people. I'm not saying that everybody has to do it, but it's a reasonable alternative for people to use. And so that's sort of where it all started. And then I wrote, the books to really sort of explain it to people. And everybody, and I think that the obesity code is really about that, that sort of explaining how it all comes about. And it's, everybody thinks that it's like a lay book because it's published, it's a book, but it's like, most doctors don't know any of the information in that. And I always think in my mind that this is actually a book that I want physicians to read. It's great if lay people read them and understand it, but this is what I actually think physicians need to understand. And then the Complete Guide to Fasting is more of a sort of a practical guide that can really help people. So it's a bit different focus.
Yeah, and I have both of those right here. And if you haven't read it, definitely, if you're watching this on YouTube, you could see the books, get them. All of his books are incredible.